I closed my first six-figure deal is when this really solidified for me. I was in front of she ran a doctor's office, and this was a six-figure deal. And Roy, I don't know if you've ever been in that position where, dude, I got to close this. Like, this is one of those make or break. I haven't eaten in a while. You feast and famine, you close a client, then you stop marketing, the whole nine. I had to close this. And everything was going good until we got to the signing. She was like, well, I'm having second thoughts. I don't know. And I'm like, oh, hell no. I'm going to lose this deal. So I said, you know what? My brother passed away. I had my first fight. She's like, I jumped into a cage. Let me tell you about that. Back then in 2003, 2004, it was illegal in 48 states. We fought on Native American reservations. It was still illegal. So this big tent, thousands of people in there, darkness, lights blaring, people throwing beer cans and popcorn. And the announcer yells, "Are you ready for a no-holds-barred fighting contest?" My heart is beating 1,000 beats a minute. I couldn't sleep 3 weeks leading up to this thing. I get to the cage door. I step into the mat, Roy. There is blood on the mat from the last fight. There was no hygiene back there. There was no rules, right? It was straight wild, wild west. And the door closes behind me, clink, and I'm like, I can't leave. I am shitting bricks. And then my opponent is pacing the ring like a tiger, talking about, I'm going to kill you. And I was shook. I wanted to be anywhere but there. And then the bell rang. And I found something that I didn't know I had. But it wasn't enough. I was getting my ass kicked. I was on the floor, more tired than I ever been in my life. And I was ready to quit. I was ready to tap. And then my coach said something I'll never forget. He said, remember what you're fighting for.
These are the proven direct response marketing, copywriting, and entrepreneurship success strategies you can use today to write your own ticket and create the life you want. I am Roy Furr, and this is Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. Now, here's today's breakthrough. Okay, so we're here for another episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, and today's episode is a little bit different from the daily content that I just produced for you, as you should be able to see if you're watching this on the screen, and if you're listening, as you'll be able to hear in a moment. I have a guest with me, Hasani X, and X as you go by, right? Before we dive into your bio and your background and like why you're even on here, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you, and I'm excited to talk with you. So welcome.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Roy. And like we talked about before, any opportunity to be of service and support to those out there and making an impact that's going to drive some income, I'm there, like 100%. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, you have this great bio. Everything about the way you approach me is awesome, and I want to talk about that in a second. But one of the things that you approach with as a great podcast guest should was a bio, a pre-written bio. So Hasani X, or X as we're going to call him here, started on the streets of Oakland, California, and he became a first generation college graduate and earned an Ivy League degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He went on to found 4E Consulting, helping grow small to mid-sized businesses. And from there, he shifted gears from developing businesses to building people as a performance consultant and leadership coach. He's now CEO of Lead Your Story, a company that uses the power of story, which, if you're been following me for a while, that's the resonance there, right? To build strong brands and company culture. Plus, we'll be talking today specifically about how your personal career and company success starts with your story as an individual. He's a father of 3, dedicated husband, modern stoic, and frankly, like, this bio is way less interesting than you're going to realize that X is as we get to know him. Now, as I said in the beginning, I haven't typically had a ton of guests, and X is even more of an exception because he actually approached me as a guest and asked me. And my default answer there is no, right? That's my default answer. But the thing was, one of the things that he sent to me was this one sheet. And if you've been in the speaking business at all, you know what a one sheet is. It's like it's how to get booked for speaking gigs. And, a lot of people do that bad, but it implemented my podcast PR blueprint to perfection. Like everything that I teach about, here is how to show up and be an awesome guest. he was displaying all those signs and signals up front. And the fact that he talks about story, he's interested in story, it was a great overlap. But even then I was like, is this guy going to have the right like content and value to deliver to my audience? It sounded like there was a little bit of a misfit because he's done a lot of awesome stuff with corporate stuff, but most of my subscribers and listeners are more entrepreneurial, right? We had a discussion. Turns out he's been doing a lot of that stuff. There's a fit with the audience. And so in the end, I thought, there's going to be a ton of value. So X, thank you again. Welcome. And I want to start with something that is, I know, a little bit sensitive, but also is going to be really powerful to give people a sense of where you're coming from and what drives you. And, in storytelling terminology, this is in media res. This is in the middle of the action. It's that pivotal point in your life. So you have a very important story involving your brother. Would you mind sharing it here as an introduction?
Yeah, Roy. Yeah, and thank you for that intro. And I definitely want to circle back on why I sent that one sheet that way, and how, if you are that solopreneur or that one-man band, how important those things are in helping you to get that next level opportunity. But my story, I like you alluded to, I grew up in Oakland, California, right? Yeah. 1978, I'm born. Boom, I hit the streets in the 80s. And I don't know if you know anything about Oakland, California. In the 80s, it was a very tough place. Okay. Like the height of the crack epidemic, poverty, gangs, death, violence, the whole nine. And let me give you context. My high school started with 500 freshmen. How many would you guess graduated?
Well, so at most high schools, it's probably 450 plus. But this sounds like it's going to be way less than that.
Yes. Only about 38 of us graduated. I'm not even going to put you on the spot. Okay. Like that's.
I was going to say 100. I was going to say 100. So
right. So crazy environment. Most of my friends killed or didn't make it. Yeah. It's a very troubling place to grow up then. But I made it. I made it out, Roy. Like the first person in my family to go to college, right? To get an Ivy League degree, right? Like my mind was shifted and blown the minute I hit that campus, and I could see what entrepreneurship, business, and wealth was like, okay, I've arrived. I'm going to go make it. Yeah. And I did. Coming out of college, I started my first company, 4E Consulting. I was doing a whole bunch of guerrilla marketing stuff in college. I was selling business cards and at the time in 1997, 98, even doing some website development stuff. Wow. 2000, I graduate and I start 4E Consulting, which is a business model around growing small businesses. And it exploded in the Los Angeles area. So I went from being this poor ghetto kid to having arrived, staff, the whole nine. I'm good. But like all good stories, something comes and punches you in the face. And it came when my mom called me one day and she was screaming on the other end, Hasani, they killed him. Like, what are you talking about? They killed him, your brother. And I was like, whoa, it floored me. Yeah. Because the last conversation I had with him, Roy, was he told me I wasn't the big brother he needed. And my response was bullshit. Listen, we grew up in the same place, had the same opportunities. You decided to live that life. Right? It wasn't on me. Yeah. And I don't know if you ever had that moment where everything comes together and you start to see the writing on the wall. Yeah. It was that moment when I was doing his eulogy and I finally got what he meant by I wasn't there for him. I wasn't his big brother. You see, as much as I was hardcore driven around my personal success, I was scared as shit to lead anybody. Like to be responsible for someone else, to say, I know better, follow me. Yeah. Right? Like including even being a big brother, like you can look at me, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to pull you in and say, this is how it's done. They wanted me to captain the football team. No, thank you. Wanted me to run for student body council. No, thank you. I punted on all things leadership. And coming out of that and it just being like, just feeling this guilt and this pressure of just not showing up out of my own fear and insecurities, I made a vow to tackle every fear that popped up for me. And
that's a big change. And I mean, still right now I'm in my late 30s. Yeah. And tackling every fear. I mean, I haven't done that by any stretch of the imagination. Right. And it's a very big commitment to your future, to the world, to the potential impact you can make. And clearly, like, wake up call, right? Like that's where
Yeah,
you were at. So
right.
sorry, I'll let you continue, but
No, but that's a good point, and I want to make this. No one ever tackles all of their fears. They're just trying to tackle the next one that's right in
yeah.
front of you. And for me, it wasn't this big courageous thing. It was kind of like close your eyes and say, okay, this is the one that's bothering me. Let me do something about it. I can't run from it. I made a vow. And one of
Yeah.
the ones that popped up for me was the fear of physical confrontation. Now, I grew up in a very tough place, but I was always pretty agile in trying to avoid problems. So I'm coming
Okay.
out of my upper middle class suburban house with a wife and two kids, and I'm about to get into the car, Roy, and I do one of these numbers. I look left and I look right, and then I get in the car and I'm like, wait a minute, what? Why am I looking left and right? And it dawned on me that I still was acting as if I was in Oakland, California, like
Okay.
thinking that someone was going to get me, but soccer mom across the street wasn't going to jump me with her posse. Like I was in no danger, but I was acting as if, and that was a signal I was in fear. So I
Yeah.
ran in the house and I told my wife, I was like, hey, babe, I'm scared of physical confrontation. Like I'm living like I'm in Oakland. She's like, what are you talking about? You're a grown ass man. Like I was like, no, seriously. And then on the TV screen was a commercial for a mixed martial arts event. Like it wasn't UFC, it was something like that. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do that. And she looked, she said, no, you're not. And I said, yes, I am.
Oh, wow.
So for a year, I trained and I had my first professional fight. And this is where everything shifted for me because as I started to really work on all of my fears, I became a better father. I became a better businessman. I became a better person. You know, all the things I was tackling. I had my first fight. I was scared of heights, so I started jumping out of planes. I was scared of like speaking in large groups. I got speaking in front of 5,000 people. Like anything that I felt, I just pushed myself into it. And as my life transformed, people started to ask me, Roy, like, okay, well, X, you've changed. Like you're a vegetarian, you know, lost like 20 pounds. You look like like the best shape in your life. How did you do it? Or I bring my kids with me. They're so mannered and they're into books. We're in Toys R Us, and my kids are reading books inside of Toys R Us. And I'm doing parenting sessions in Toys R Us on my parenting style. And you know, my high school sweetheart, like a strong marriage. And business owners started to ask me about those things. And
Wow.
that's when I transitioned to starting to build people and coaching. And before long, really get into depth of my own processes and my own IP around it, I started to delve into corporate leadership. And
Okay.
that's for 5 or 6 years, Roy, I was working with publicly traded companies on building leaders. This is a good old boy from Oakland, California, telling people 20, 30 years my senior how to build their teams and how to lead. It was crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, there, that's it's a really hard story to follow in terms of asking the questions about like where do you go from there. But I know like if I look at some of your accomplishments, you generated $100 million in value for clients. You helped them craft thousands of stories. You've trained over 10,000 leaders and team members in story specific to how story creates leadership.
Mhm.
And I know that one of the directions that you've been going recently is to step back and saying, okay, I've been doing this impact at the corporate level. And I've been doing the impact in terms of growing teams and growing people within corporations, growing leaders within corporations. But how can I grow like founders and people who are launching businesses and people who are influencers and thought leaders as leaders, maybe not just inside like a corporate HR
Right.
environment, but as market leaders, as people leaders outside of a business. So
Mhm.
what does that transition look like for moving from corporations to entrepreneurs, where it's no longer about, okay, how can we lead a team to hit our quarterly numbers so that our stock price keeps going in the right direction
Mhm.
next month, versus how can we tell a story that's going to grow our business and create the impact in the world that we want. So
Right.
what's
Right.
what's that like?
Yeah, and that's a good question because for me, I've always been an entrepreneur. Even when I was little, growing up in the streets, I sold my mom tacos and now later, whatever I could do to make a buck. Um, And one of my missions is to impact 100 million people's lives. And I recognize working with a bunch of corporations, I make good money, but my capacity to impact where I come from, who I am, I'm limited in that regard. So
Yeah.
I've always had a cadre of entrepreneurs or small businesses that I work with. In fact, we didn't talk about this yet, but the next venture for me is we're starting a private equity investing and advising firm where we're pouring our money into small businesses to help them to grow for equity. Like I'm serious about helping small businesses to maneuver, to grow, because I believe it's through our stories and our capacity to change lives that the world changes. We're on the streets. We're connected to people and communities in ways that big corporate conglomerates are not. And that's my mission. So for me, that transition from building businesses to building people, there was one more leap that I think would be interesting for everyone to consider.
Yeah.
How I built businesses, whether I was working in Philadelphia with guerrilla marketing or 4E consulting, and how I built people in my coaching and leadership business, it came down to the same exact science: story. The story that we tell ourselves impacts how we show up as entrepreneurs. If you believe in your heart of hearts that you can't impact lives or land that corporate 6-figure or 7-figure deal, you will not.
Or you can't be a leader, period, because that,
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks to your own recognition.
Right. So that story internally needs to be congruent, but you also need to project that outside of you to influence those around you. And then you need to be able to project that story externally to the market to build brand, to build awareness, to attract people to which your value. Story was the tool I leaned on all the way back when I was 8, 9, 10, trying to escape trouble. I would talk my way out of it. I would tell a good story. Like I would figure out a way. And it's always been that core weapon. And right now, I believe that that core weapon is so important, especially for small businesses, more so than it's ever been, because I think we're in the precipice of this radical market shift. And it's the shift between the dichotomy of being a big business and being a brand. Because if you're not one of these two, you're going to get decimated. Like, are you aware? We talked about working from home a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Over 100,000 people have been inserted into the freelance marketing space as a result of COVID.
Yeah.
All the people who had marketing jobs and don't want to go back to them are now in our market, saying they can do what we do. It was cutthroat before. It's even more so now.
Yeah.
So how do you stand out?
Story.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
Your capacity to do digital marketing, to create some neat graphics, video, whatever your niche is. If you don't have a story that is attached to this relative commodity in the market, you're going to have a hard time.
Yeah.
Or you need to be a big business that trade at scale, which isn't in our purview.
So there's a couple of things that I want to hit on here. Like number one is the whole brand thing, because I think, like in my little world of direct response marketers, right, we're all focused on getting conversions or getting response, right? And brand has been a bad word for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But the trend that I've noticed and that I've tried to embrace and accept going forward is that you can be direct response and build a brand. If brand isn't just a full page ad with 3 words of text and a logo and a pretty picture isolated on a black background, right?
Yeah,
if that's the only definition of brand, maybe that doesn't generate response. But if your brand is your story, if your brand is the total impression that somebody has of you in the marketplace, your total reputation, which comes out of the stories that you tell and they repeat, then this idea of brand versus big business it is how the little brands take over markets.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
like
excellent.
Exactly. And one point here to insert. As small businesses, I never say go in all on brand. We need to eat tomorrow. We don't have millions of dollars to create brand awareness and to saturate the market. No, I got to eat tomorrow. I got kids. I got to figure out how to make this happen. The misnomer is I got to choose one or the other. It's both. It's having
Yes.
a direct response, targeted CTA with great copy, the whole nine, and a hellified story and packaging that alludes to who you are. And here's a good test. Brands create irreplaceable feeling in the minds, hearts, and souls of the target market. If your pieces aren't evoking a feeling inside of the heart and minds and souls of your prospects, then it's not branded content. Because that feeling needs to be connected from your direct mail pieces to your business card to your one sheet to your website to the whole nine, where you're saying, this is what I want people to feel when they think about me.
Yes.
If I can replace any other business's messaging in my marketing and it be the same, you've missed the whole point of what brand is.
Absolutely. And I guess in that regard, like what we've always hated is the image advertising, not brand in particular, because brand is just it's that recognition, it's that emotional relationship. So the other point that I wanted to get back to is you talked about internal story. And of course you have your own internal story, the pivot point being your brother dying, where you went from I can't lead to I have to be a leader. And it was like, some people are born great. Some people, I'm going to totally mess up the quote, but some people have greatness thrust upon them. And you had this greatness and leadership thrust upon you. So on, in one aspect, I want to talk about how you like what it was like for you to go through that process of shifting your internal story. And I want to add the layer to that of a concept that you talk about, which is connecting your personal defining moment to business outcomes. And so, can you speak to that?
Yeah. Okay. That question has a couple of parts. So let me start with the idea of all the people I work with who the first thing they say is, I don't have a story. I don't have this defining moment. My brother didn't die. And I have these other stories I tell. I'm not this big firework type guy or gal, and it just doesn't connect with me. So my personal story isn't relevant. And I think the misnomer is the idea is that the story is about fireworks. It's not about stepping into a cage like me or your brother passing away. It's about the ethic and the ethos, meaning how people feel about you as a storyteller. Now, Roy, we've been talking for a while. Would you connect the feeling of soft-spoken to me?
No.
Or like this super nurturing, caring guy? Like there's a certain aspect of my story and all of the pieces I use to help tell that connect me to a feeling. The question you need to ask yourself is, what do you want people to feel? And this was my hang up too. Because I was like, well, what is my defining moment? That's one story, but I got 10 other things that I could tell. And people are looking for the story. There is no the story. It's the story that you can tell that connects deeply to who you are and portrays, right, the ethic and ethos of your character. And that is what, especially in the service business, helps you to move the ball forward. I don't know if we have time, but I closed my first six-figure deal is when this really solidified for me. I was in front of she ran a doctor's office, and this was a six-figure deal. And Roy, I don't know if you've ever been in that position where, dude, I got to close this. Like, this is one of those make or break. I haven't eaten in a while. You feast and famine, you close a client, then you stop marketing, the whole nine. I had to close this. And everything was going good until we got to the signing. She was like, well, I'm having second thoughts. I don't know. And I'm like, oh, hell no. I'm going to lose this deal. So I said, you know what? My brother passed away. I had my first fight. She's like, I jumped into a cage. Let me tell you about that. Back then in 2003, 2004, it was illegal in 48 states. We fought on Native American reservations. It was still illegal. So this big tent, thousands of people in there, darkness, lights blaring, people throwing beer cans and popcorn. The announcer yells, "Are you ready for a no-holds-barred fighting contest?" My heart is beating 1,000 beats a minute. I couldn't sleep 3 weeks leading up to this thing. I get to the cage door. I step into the mat, Roy. There is blood on the mat from the last fight. There was no hygiene back there. There was no rules. right? It was straight wild, wild west. And the door closes behind me, clink, and I'm like, I can't leave. I am shitting bricks. And then my opponent is pacing the ring like a tiger, talking about, I'm going to kill you. And I was shook. I wanted to be anywhere but there. And then the bell rang. And I found something that I didn't know I had, but it wasn't enough. I was getting my ass kicked. I was on the floor, more tired than I ever been in my life. And I was ready to quit. I was ready to tap. And then my coach said something I'll never forget. He said, remember what you're fighting for. He doesn't even remember saying it. Yeah. I remember it. It was like a whisper. I thought about my wife. I thought about my kids. I thought about my brother. I thought about everything. And I was able to turn that fight around, get back on my feet, and knock him out later in the first round. I looked across at the doctor and I said, you know what? I know what I'm fighting for. It sounds like you don't. What are you fighting for? 5 minutes later, she signed. Now, let me ask you, what the hell does that have to do with building businesses? Nothing.
No.
Unless you're saying she believes in me as a guide, a worthy guide in her, helping her to hit her goal. That's the key element.
Yeah. So it's a matter of recognizing, okay, I don't have X's stories. I don't have Roy's stories. I don't have whoever's stories. Mm-hmm. But things have happened to me in my life. And if I think back, I've had emotional experiences that, speak to some element of where I am today. And in those emotional experiences, I learned lessons. And those lessons may be connected to whatever particular selling message I'm trying to get across today. And it doesn't even have to be something big, but it's a matter of being able to tell this compelling story that when I've taught story selling in the past, there's the story itself, right? And then there's how does this reflect on your character or the character, and we could say brand that you're building in the audience, that personal brand. And then how is that connected to the selling situation? So you have your brother's story, but that's not connected to every selling situation. You have this MMA story. I know that you have a jumping out of a plane story. You have powerlifting stories. You have marathon stories. I even understand you have a jail riot story.
Yeah. Stop the jail riot. Crazy.
Yeah. At some point, you're having a conversation with somebody, or you're putting together a marketing piece. You're putting this message out in the world for one person or for however many million might see it. And there's a connection in your brain between, okay, this is relevant to this. And if it moves that decision-making process forward, it could be relevant here to making this sale or to moving an entire market towards you.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because you demonstrated a very small connection in terms of connecting that personal defining moment to business. And it allowed you to tell this interesting story, right? Mm-hmm. And then you made that tiny connection. What are you fighting for?
It's that bridge. And that's the part that people get hung up. How do you bridge that story to the business side and make it relevant? I tell people, make two distinct categories when you're thinking about the idea of your business and your service. One category distinctly is your value, meaning the value you provide. What do you do for your clients explicitly, exactly, specifically, and precisely that a kindergartner can understand it? What is that? And what are the core features of that people talk about over and over again that distinguish you? These are the values. And these are usually functions, features, and some facts about your service. Understand those well. Those need to be part of your brand narrative and part of your collateral, whatever, however you're marketing. But this other side is values. Values are the feelings that you want people to connect to these functional utility things, right? So what do you want your clients to feel about you? Or what do they feel about you in terms of the relationship and connectedness of you? Now, go back and find experiences in your life that you've gone through, that you've witnessed. Some people tell stories third person. Like I have a client who's like, my life has been a never-ending series of green lights. Like I haven't been through anything. But it's helped me to truly understand how blessed I am to be here. And so I give everything I have to my clients. And Then he tells stories of 3 o'clock in the morning, waking up to somebody doing this. I have a client who runs a few melting pots, and he's the type of leader who will bail his employees out of jail. He tells stories about that. That's the type of place we run here. We are going to bail each other out when we're in a pinch. So when he shows up, the waiter staff, and they don't feel good, we're going to pick up the step. We're not going to get on them. We're going to pick it up. We're going to bail them out. Like, oh, he tells that story, and they lead the melting pot, which has over 100 franchises and the lowest turnover in the nation. And with the highest sales growth, when we help them to tell those type of stories front end. It's not about fireworks. It's about the ethic and ethos that connects us emotionally so that we can believe that you are going to be a worthy guide, a trustworthy guide in my journey to become a hero.
Yeah, that's also a great example of how it doesn't have to be your story. It can be your client's story. It can be your team's story. It can be how you interact with your team. It can be how you interact with your clients. And all of these are, again, just contributing to your character, to your brand, to this emotional impression of your values, right? And that's fascinating. So one of the things that you have done is you are helping. You're helping clients tell their stories. And one of the things that I do, and a large segment of my subscribers do, is take client stories, pull them out of them, like pulling teeth often, and translate that into what's in, a video script or a web page or whatever media you're going to put it into. So what experience do you have, and what lessons can you teach about, even if you don't do copywriting, that's not what's on the line item of your invoice, what lessons can you teach about helping clients tell their stories and how we can do that better?
Yeah, definitely. Let me take a step back and say there are typically 3 stories you want to trade on: your customer story, your founder story, and your mission story. So the founder story is the only one that really inserts you into the mix. And we can come back to that in a second. So don't feel like you have to be the center of attention. In fact, there are many brands who don't trade on the founder story. It's not even relevant, right? You got to understand where you have power and where you have relevancy, but there are 3 core stories. But let's talk about the formula of extracting a good story or telling a great story. There are 4 Ps, and I try to make this as simple as possible. Every great story is going to have these 4 Ps. The first one is problems and pain. Like, the hero of the story has to go through some problems or pain where there's doubt, worry, fear, anxiety, right? Where they meet the bottom of their pit. The best stories are just that, right? You can't go wrong with that type of story. The second part, which even when we're doing customer testimonies, or even when we're branding on we forget this other P, which is paradigm. The paradigm is what keeps the hero trapped. It's a way of thinking and seeing the world that limits how the possibilities they see, right? There's a paradigm. There's a way of thinking that keeps them trapped. You need to be able to tell a story to where that trap becomes solved, that puzzle gets solved. And now they can access power, right? What do they do explicitly to move out of their problems and pain? Because now they have the key. Right? The paradigm opens the jail cell, but you're still behind prison walls. So now you have to fight to get out of the prison. And that's the power, the steps that the hero takes to get out. And then the last part is pleasure. What do I get? How is life different now? Who did I become as a result of this journey? So when you have problems, paradigm, the power, and pleasure, just those 4 things, you can tell a really good story.
I am furiously taking notes here, and I'm being reminded of the Hero's 2 Journeys by Christopher Vogler and Michael Haig. And I had to look that up just to make sure I nailed the authors' names. I think it was actually the first thing I bought through Audible. It talks about the external journey that we go through and like what's going on physically in the world around us. But like any great storytelling is going to involve an internal journey. And so what you're talking about here is that problem is the external barrier, the external roadblocks, the external whatever thing that we have to overcome in most cases, right?
Right, right.
But then that paradigm and the power that's achieved through addressing it is that internal journey that we have to go through before we can solve the external problem. And the pleasure is like this total experience of not just I solved the problem, but I became a better person through doing it.
Right.
And that's fascinating. I love that 4 piece framework. I mean, any framework like that helps us even better conceptualize the stories that we tell. And I have my own set of frameworks, right? But anything like that helps us better conceptualize it is so useful.
Yeah. And sometimes when we're small businesses, you can look at those 4 Ps and say, well, how does this make me $1? How does this translate into creating the desire or connecting with our core market? Especially when we say, I'm going to remove me, Roy, or X from the story. Well, let's think about an iconic brand like Apple, right? Very simple idea. When they were struggling and they brought Steve Jobs back and he did that iconic Rebel campaign that transformed Apple and is still legendary to this day. It had all 4 of those Ps around a product. There was a problem. You were trapped in this chaos of this PC world where people didn't understand you. And the paradigm that you accepted was you had to take it. You had to. No choice. But what do they present you with? You can be the rebel. You can be different. You can be a change maker. And they brought up Muhammad Ali and Gandhi and all these other figures to evoke this paradigm shift of fighting against evil or less than, to become a rebel, a change maker. And all you got to do is use our products and life will be better. They unlocked a paradigm that was keeping their target market that they felt stuck. And if you understand what that is, you can build true connection to even a product, not just a service, but anything when you tell that great story.
It's a narrative arc behind the reason why of the product. Which is relevant. I mean, there's almost a mission story of the product itself in there. If I understand your reference there, I don't know. Maybe you would disagree with me, or maybe your focus, like initially, is defining a mission story for the company as a whole. But every marketing campaign, like every good product, has a reason why for existing.
Right.
And it is to solve a problem. I mean,
exactly. So this is the part where if you're a small entrepreneur, it can feel utterly complex. And if you're starting to grow, you can feel overwhelmed. And I tell people, think of story as the foundation of your story never changes. But each room inside of your house has a different way of telling that story from a different perspective, perhaps, but the ethic and idea still comes back to solving this core problem. So those 3 stories I talked about, the customer story, the founder story, and the mission story. Well, the customer story is about how you transform customers' lives. 90% of the time, it's going to be out front. People don't care about you and what you have done. They care about how you're going to help their lives become better. And you need to get good at telling those stories, right? Through your copy, through your direct mail pieces, through video, whatever you do with podcasts, doesn't matter. Customers are out front. They want to know how their lives are better. But that second story is your founder story, which isn't about how great you are. Still, no one cares about you. You came on and said, I'm the suave guy. You remember, nobody cares unless I can help them be suave, right? So it's not about how great you are. It's about what experiences have you been through that make you a worthy guide in that person's story and journey to becoming a hero. And then the third story is your mission, is what you stand for. Like, what do you stand for that you're fighting for? What mountain is your organization or you climbing that you're planting your flag in the ground? And increasingly, this is becoming an even more important story because consumers are asking the question, okay, your products are great, but what do you stand for? And the younger the consumer now, the more important that story is. So think of this as your past, present, and future story. Past is the founder, present is the customer, and future is the mission. It's a timeline of stories, all basically honing in on the same ethic and ethos. But here's the thing, not everybody has power in each of those 3 stories. And I'll give you an example. Elon Musk is a unicorn because he can tell stories and he can connect with this marketplace from all 3. Just think about it. Founder, PayPal, Tesla, Solar City. He's freaking Iron Man, and then these products, his customer story, and then his mission to transform human life in Mars, like he crushes it across the board. He's a unicorn. I'm not a unicorn. And as great as you are, you're probably not as well. So you have to ask the question, which of these stories can I trade in? You remember Dollar Shave Club?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when they launched, there were like 15 other competitors that launched in and around the same time, but all of them failed. Now think about Dollar Shave Club. The razors were crap. They weren't fancy things. So it wasn't the customer story. And we didn't know much about the founders at all. They crushed it through a mission story. We stand for the little guy and the tyranny of evil of big razor companies who charge $30, and we're here for you.
Yeah.
We're going to represent the little guy. They even show their workers in their viral commercials or how they stand with them. And the irony was they were bought for $1 billion by Gillette. They traded on that story, and they crushed it with it. So understand where you have power in those three stories and focus more of your effort there.
That's excellent. So, okay. I would say that the call to action for people in the context of finding their marketing story would be to listen to this 8 times if you have to, listen to this 80 times if you have to, and think about how, even if it's just one story, finding that story and being able to tell it is going to make you a more effective marketer, because it's going to help you communicate better. I mean, as humans, we've been doing what's called marketing for maybe a couple hundred years. Like modern advertising probably goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, right? Mm-hmm. There's stuff before that, but what we know as marketing as it is now is really only 100 years old, 100 to 200 years old. Mm-hmm. Storytelling, story is culture. Story has been how we've communicated. It's the reason language exists. Like, I went out onto the savannah and I got chased by a tiger over there. Don't go over there, right? Yeah. We communicated that way for, I don't know, as far as we know, language has been maybe a couple 100,000 years in development, right? And then as we shared all these common languages and more complex languages and complex stories, culture exploded, right? 10,000 years ago. And so many of us are defined by the stories of our culture. The Bible, story of our culture. Quran, story of our culture. All of the Buddhist sacred texts, story of our culture, right? And almost, or our country story, our founding story of our country. And by recognizing that it's this universal and ancient communication mechanism, you're tapping into something much bigger than just like, oh, I know how to write a advertising headline, right? But the one thing that I want to come back around to is I want to come back around to, okay, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm telling my story. I'm telling my founder story. I'm figuring out what my customer story is, my founder story, my mission story. I'm figuring out what the reason why is story for my product. How, we tell that in our advertising and we get ROI, but on a different level, you were doing this in publicly traded companies, and you were growing them beyond just revenue, top line, bottom line. You were growing cultures, and having a good company culture, even if you're an early stage company, is going to help you grow. So how does developing your brand story and getting in touch with this early as a founder help you grow, as human beings within the company, as the company, in the community, et cetera?
Right. That's a great point. I think a lot of people, when we talk about culture, we make it more complex than it needs to be. So if we just break apart the word culture, it has 2 key words. Cult is the key word. You're building a cult, which is basically a way of thinking, feeling, and doing. A prescription, right? A story or an ethic that guides us in our behavior. The second is cultivate. A culture cultivates and reproduces these same thoughts, feelings, and actions. So culture is like planting a seed, an apple seed, for example, and then you have to nurture it and grow it and build it. If you're an entrepreneur, and you're a solopreneur and you're starting to grow, you've planted a seed. And the only thing that grows wild and crazy are weeds. You got to be very careful around what you're planting and what you're nurturing inside of you and the one or two other people around you, because that's going to become solidified as your culture. And when that tree, whatever tree you're planting, grows up and fruit is produced, when you crack open that fruit, what's inside of it? Another seed. Yeah. And that's the power of culture and why culture trumps strategy, because it's a self-perpetuating engine. So if you're not taking care of that story, and I call it the story synergy from beginning to end, your internal story as an entrepreneur showing up to cultivate the right thoughts, feelings, and actions day by day, so you can get the most out of yourself and create more impact. And then as you grow, being able to communicate what these values are and what we believe and how we do things to others is important in cultivating that story, that ethic, and building something around you. I think a lot of us take for granted, I don't have a staff, so I can show up any kind of way I want to. You know, part of the reason why I dress up for these interviews, and even though I'm in my garage right now, and I know the set looks all fancy, and you probably heard the weed whacker out there. Dude, I have to tell my mind that I am about serious business right now, no matter where I am. So I'm going to dress up. That's for me. Now, I got clients, and this probably doesn't even apply to Roy. You can feel fully and wholly comfortable without doing all of that. I, on the other hand, haven't been able to master that. But there are certain things that you do, like you called me and pre-interviewed me. And I think that's part of your process of being prepared and being a host and da-da-da-da-da. Some other podcasts I've been on, they just wing it. I went to your LinkedIn profile. Great, let's go do it. No, there's no right or wrong, but you know what works for you to help you show up strong, which is creating a culture, a way of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and you're sticking to it on purpose. And I love that. And it's necessary, whether you're an army of one or 1,000, it always matters.
Yes, absolutely. And what you do as the individual, there's that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so even though I talk about, you have this incredible sense of fashion and mine doesn't match it, my clothing is that same type of intentional choice for what feels right for me for my workday. And it is a story. I mean, Steve Jobs didn't have as good a fashion as you, but he had his uniform, right? Yeah. Like he showed up and Steve Jobs was in his uniform to be the leader of Apple. And frankly, part of that rebel culture that it led to the rebirth of Apple was Steve Jobs not wearing a suit, being the CEO of Apple, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this point about that, so many of us look outside of ourselves for verification of who we should be. And we miss the boat around connecting to our authentic selves, right? Like it's in trying to be everyone else that we miss the subtle cues that allow us to stand strong in our own space. And that's unfortunate, because the more you are like everyone else, the less you will distinguish yourself among the crowd. And that's the irony.
Okay, I want to hit.
Go ahead.
Oh, I want to hit two topics really quick, and I want to make sure that I get to the launch my story thing. And one of them is a direct, I think, connection to what you were just saying, because in that one sheet, one of the buried bullet points, as far as the different things that you could talk about, was your experience with meditation and spirituality. And you were just talking about like trying to be like somebody else. Right. And most of us don't even see all the ways that we're trying to be like somebody else. And usually somebody doesn't even start having that conversation until they've been through 1,000 hours of meditation. And you say you have 10,000 hours, and I don't know how many hours, but I know at this point I'm over 1,400 days straight. And so how, I guess I want to address that. I want to get like the 2-minute version of the jail riot story. And then I want to talk about launch my story. So how has having a mindfulness practice, a meditation practice, a spirituality practice impact your ability to tell your own story and to be able to like recognize, okay, this is who I want to be in the world. This is the impact that I want to have.
Man, I tell people meditation saved my life. Like I wouldn't still be married. I wouldn't be the father I am. I wouldn't have jumped into any cage if it was left to my own, like I had to cultivate within me a sacred space to truly understand what was important to me. And it doesn't matter how you go about doing that, but meditation was my tool of choice there. And I think through self awareness on one side is just becoming aware of who you are and who you've been. But I think that's cup half full. The other side is self discovery. Because if all you're becoming aware of is who you are, like there's this big movement around authenticity and being yourself. And I agree, but I think that's half of the remedy. Because of being who you are and being your authentic self locks you into being who you've always been, you will not grow. And if you're not looking in the mirror and addressing the ugly parts of who you are and just saying, accept me for who I am, well, the market doesn't care about your authentic self unless there's value that you can connect to it. And that's the other piece. Becoming aware of your authentic value and brand, right? Your story, you have to do the work now of finding the places and spaces where that has value. The market will only care about value, not how authentic you are. But the irony is if you chase value without authenticity and connection to self, you're going to be a carbon copy of something outside of you. So for me, meditation was a practice in understanding the principles that govern who I am and being able to hold true to them. And I'll give you an example. In these corporate spaces, I always look different. So I got 2 earrings on, I have a suit on, but I have Jordans on, right? I'm an African-American male, last name X, bald head. Like I am, you look at me, I don't belong.
Yeah.
If I didn't also have a ton of value to offer, they would have been like, get the hell out of here. It isn't just about being authentic and connecting to who you are, which is ground floor. Now you got to find a place to do the building of your building, if you will, or your house on land where people can appreciate the value you bring.
It's that meditative language of like recognizing, being able to step back from your ego, but also being able to appreciate like this ego came out of this world and it has a uniqueness that nobody else has. And so how can I appreciate that? But then still in the space of stepping back, connect it and say, like, if I'm not just in my ego, what does that ego and life experience and learning and insights and perspectives have to provide to the market in terms of value? And then how can I connect the story and all that? Okay. So this jail riot story, like what, I mean, you were on a mission to become a leader, and part of your work was in prisons and helping people who to figure out how they were going to turn their life around in prison and outside of prison. So what happened there? And then I want to talk about Launch My Story.
All right. So this was early in my transformation from building businesses to building people. And I was asked to do a program inside of a jail. And I named it 60 Days to Live. It was the worst name ever. It was kind of like, why did I choose that? But it was a 60-day program with 60 lessons in it, as if you were going to die the next day. So the first day, I circled up all these inmates, and it was optional. They didn't have to come. So circle up inmates. And I said, okay, who went through something painful in their life that they think is holding them back? And someone raised their hand. I was like, come to the middle. I had to really put the pressure on and, be real charismatic to get someone to volunteer for this.
Yeah.
So I say, hey, all right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes and this is an old NLP technique, neuro-linguistic programming technique. Close your eyes, go into a theater, open the screen, look at it, turn it black and white. We're trying to create a disassociative connection to this very painful memory. And I did it 1,000 times on myself and no problems. Roy, about 30 seconds into it, this dude broke down and was screaming and hollering. He was going crazy. He didn't even sit down in the theater seat to do the imagination yet. He just lost it. And everybody around started getting agitated and they lost it. Then all the people in the 3 tiers came out of their rooms and then people started throwing shit and doing stuff. And the guards are on the phone like, all right, we're about to do a lockdown and, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And Roy, just like when I had my fight, when I talked about the cage, there's something about being thrust into the moment where you find something you thought you never had. You don't even know you have it. But I grabbed the back of his neck, put his head against mine. I don't remember what I said, but I walked him back out of it and he calmed down. Then the inmates on the floor calmed down. Then the people up on the tiers calmed down. And then he
Yeah.
came out of it and he stopped crying and hollering. And I was like, how do you feel now? And I was like, where's the pain? He was like, I can't feel it. It's gone.
Hmm.
And then everyone went, oh, and then that's when I got the moniker Professor X. They called me Professor X the whole time I was there doing that work. So yeah, that's my prison riot story.
Wow. There's so much, there's so much power in just, number one, there's the power of, I don't know, there's that Eminem song. I'm in love with the monster, right? In like recognizing that there's this monster that's been prowling around that you haven't been paying attention to. And we all, I don't know, even people that claim that they don't have monsters, I don't trust them. But a lot of us have it in cages, and there's power in connecting with that kind of gets unleashed. And then I imagine something you said had to do with like accepting it, but not letting it be you, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's,
I would reinterpret it one more way. I would say it could be a monster or whatever it is in front of you. I think we give it more power and authority and control than it otherwise should.
yeah,
And but there's a rightful. We're right in many ways for being kind of standoffish and protecting ourselves.
yeah,
And that's why I tell people when I was a coach and I did that exclusively, my technique was exposure therapy. Like you can go through cognitive behavioral therapy, you can go through the 7 steps, this, all of that. But my thing was, what are you scared of? Let's go do that tomorrow. Period. And we just would do that over and over and over again.
yeah.
And isn't it until you're exposed to your monster that you start to see it's really not this big badass thing that you think it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Man, I feel like we're just scratching the surface of the most interesting conversation. And so I imagine, if somebody's listening at this point, they want to get more from you. And so that's my marketer's transition into, there's a call to action here, just like where to get more from X. And you have this new project, launchmystory.com, and I'll include a link in the description with this episode. And it's a mini course, right? And so most of us in the marketing world, we know what a mini course is. You get lesson, right? I love the lesson titles, and I love how I was talking earlier about that bridge or about that like old fight between direct marketing and branding. And I love how I can tell from the titles, I could tell from the titles alone that this isn't that fight. This is the productive and positive coexistence and cooperation of conversion and brand. So do you mind if I go through, as my throat is like dry for a second, do you mind if I go through the titles?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So why best story always wins? Yeah. Best story wins is your, like, it's a mantra of this. How great leaders and brands communicate. How to create your unifying brand story. Craft customer stories that convert. Founder and mission stories that inspire, and build your strategic brand and culture plan. So great lessons there. And I know it just builds on what we've talked about here. And so I would I don't know if there's anything else you want to say, but I would encourage people to go to launchmystory.com. It's an opportunity to dive deeper into your work and to get more from you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about that course?
No. Thank you, Rory, for that. Definitely go to launchmystory.com, register for that. You'll get those 6 lessons and we dive into it. In fact, it's the same exact blueprint I walk my clients through. So step by step, you'll get all of that for free. But I also encourage you, if you really are the type of person who benefits from engagement and walking through things and asking questions and going back and forth, we have our X Factor community. If you text me, and every week I go live and I'm just answering questions. And this is basically an open book. And we're diving into things that matter for small entrepreneurs and business owners around their brand story, around culture, around closing with story, whatever the question of the day is, we pour in. So that number is 800-425-2095, 800-425-2095. And in fact, put in keyword Roy. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to send you, I've got to remember this and remind me, Roy, I'm going to send you, because you talked about it earlier. How do you extract a good story from someone? Well, we have our 8-question framework for extracting a perfect story from a customer or anyone else. I'll send that to you. It's a PDF, a video explaining the whole nine. The same stuff that we use. Just put in Roy, and I'll make sure I send that to you. But each week, you'll also hear from me in terms of our X Factor community sessions.
So that's a text message, correct?
Yes, text message.
Yes.
Yeah.
So X, like X, right? X Factor community, you text 800-425-2095 with the keyword Roy, and he's going to send you the 8 questions to help extract stories from clients, from anybody that you're working with, to help them tell their story better for the purpose of business, entrepreneurship, marketing, and importantly, including leading people, not just leading markets to buy, right?
Right.
So
and that's important, just real quick, because user-generated content has a 22x times better conversion rate than the stories coming from the actual marketer themselves. Your customers need to be telling those stories. And that's why it's so important to be able to extract those stories from your customers in a variety of formats, video, text, audio, to where you can tell those stories. And this walks you through how to do that.
Awesome. Well, so just a final wrap up. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for having such a polished process in place. And I say process because it's not just having a one sheet that looks good. It's having a one sheet that does all the right things. And that is a process in the form of a PDF document. And thank you for having that so that I could recognize the value and bring it to Breakthrough Marketing Secrets subscribers and anybody else that happens to find this through the many media channels that they come out. So X, one more time, thank you so much for being on Breakthrough Marketing Secrets.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you once again for tuning in to this daily episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. Remember, check out the links with this episode for even more value. Now make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and engage in every way you can to keep this show going and growing and delivering daily value to you. I'll catch you soon for your next big breakthrough.